we're going to talk about the impact of science. So the first question is, what has science done for you lately? I want you to come up with 5 ways that science has impacted your life in the last month, and make sure you write them on your notes. So take a moment, pause the video, make your list of 5 ways, and then come back and continue the video. So once you've made your list, this is just an example of 5 ways I could think of science affecting probably an average person's life in the last month. If you've used a cell phone or really any technology, you've driven a car, ridden on public transportation of any type, any food you've eaten, medicines you may have taken, and electricity you may have used. So obviously cell phones, it's maybe not be obvious where science is in that, but the development of the materials to make cell phones rely on semiconductors, which we're going to talk about what those are in the course of this semester. So there's a lot of chemistry, a lot of physics in the development of cell phones. A lot of technology is based on those 2 subjects. Cars are also physics, chemistry. Food kind of goes back to agriculture, biology, chemistry. Medicine is a lot of biology and chemistry. Electricity, depending on the type of electricity we're talking about or how it's being generated, it could be biology, chemistry, or physics. So these are all examples of ways that just those 3 science topics relate to these 5 photos. There's also earth science, astronomy, and geology and weather. I should break those apart. Geology, weather, and astronomy that might have some impact on these 5 photos as well. So is the impact of science always positive or always negative? So you're going to think of one example of how science has positively impacted your life in the last month, and then one example of how science has negatively impacted your life in the last month. Now, you just made a list of 5, so you may find, well, this is an example of negative, or this was an example of positive. So think about the list you made. Were all the examples positive, or were they negative on the last slide that we talked about? Because that might indicate how you perceive science in your everyday life, as positive or negative. But this will get you to think about it from the other side. If you didn't come up with a negative one, now you will. So pause the video, make your example of, or come up with your example of science positively and negatively impacting your life, and then come back and we'll talk about an example that I will provide you. So the example I could think of is, I am a migraine sufferer. I have been for the majority of my life. They stem from different reasons, but as of late, some of the reasons have been because of computer use or technology use. So on the left you see computers are great. We can do so many things with computers, with cell phones. The advances we've made because of technology are undeniable. However, the amount of time I spend in front of a screen has directly contributed to the amount of headaches I have in a month. And so for me, I have to really view computers sometimes as a negative impact on my life, because they're so easy to have, so easy to use. It's part of almost every job you might have. And so therefore, to me, it can be a negative example of impact of science. Now, a positive impact related to migraines is that I learned in about my 20s that Excedrin migraine was pretty amazing stuff. It's a little bit of aspirin, acetaminophen, and caffeine. The caffeine helps to transport the acetaminophen throughout your body, which gives you a relief, and it's the perfect amount. You take 2 Excedrin tablets. Each of the Excedrin are 65 milligrams of caffeine. For the average adult, it takes about 130 milligrams of caffeine to achieve that relieving effect that aspirin will give you with the caffeine. Any less caffeine, you don't get that increased benefit. So to me, that's science. That combination, the synergistic effect of caffeine and aspirin together, that's science that's determined that for us. That's not, no one was born with that information. That was stuff that was figured out through the scientific method patients, history, observing their responses, and so to me, that's a positive impact. I take Excedrin migraine when I get a migraine, and to me, it's a great example of a positive impact. So how does science impact our personal decision making? This is something that you're going to want to teach your kids in your classrooms, is how to see how science makes them, how it shapes their life, their personal life. Now, just coming out of COVID, we've heard a lot about washing your hands. Now, we know the importance of washing our hands now, but why do we know the importance of it? We know the importance of it because science has gone through a series of tests where we've swabbed the bacteria on the hand before and after washing our hands to say it gets rid of 99.9% of all bacteria. And so we wash our hands because we know that it keeps us from being as sick as we probably would, keeps food contamination very low. But that was done through the scientific method, making an observation, coming with a hypothesis, testing it, and coming to a conclusion. Now, if you are ever in the position to buy a car, you may be looking at diesel versus gas. So that is not always the number one criteria in your personal decision making, but it might be part of your decision making whenever you're purchasing a car. Because diesel has a higher cost right now per gallon than gasoline, the lower levels of gasoline, like the 87. And so you may decide to get a gasoline vehicle because you're going to save money on your gas bill. However, diesel vehicles have an added benefit in that we tend to have more diesel than we do gasoline, at least in the supply. So the demand is a little bit less. So in times of when the prices of gas go up really high, the price of diesel doesn't go up as quickly as high. So that's an added benefit. So you may decide to purchase a diesel because if we ever run into the summer months where gas goes up to $3, $4, $5 a gallon, diesel tends to stay right around the same range as it does during the low demand times. There might be other reasons, miles per gallon, and this is all related back to how efficient fuel are. Another one is you might see this little hurricane image here. When you get ready to get a job, you get ready to buy a house or go live somewhere, and say you move down to the Gulf Coast and you're living in an area where there is a likelihood that you might encounter a hurricane, you are going to make decisions about the construction of your home or the place in which you live based on will it withstand a hurricane. And what we know about buildings that withstand hurricane-like winds is based on science, engineering, physics, and what we've learned through weather analysis. And so science may, even though you're not thinking about, I'm purchasing this particular house because it can withstand this wind speed or it has shutters, you don't think that science has directly impacted that. But we know that hurricanes tend to hit certain areas during certain times because weather analysis has told us that. The last one is recycle, reduce, reuse. This is becoming a really important thing in our world right now, is to minimize the amount of plastic waste. The reason why is because we know that the plastic waste decomposes very slowly, much slower than what we're generating it at. It's filling up the oceans, it's polluting our world, which is harming the environment, harming ecosystems. And so we're looking for alternative products to plastic, but then also how to repurpose plastic so that we're not contributing so much to the global pollution problem. So this is another reason why you might choose a paper straw instead of a plastic straw. And while that is your personal decision making, and sometimes it's driven by society, all of that is driven by what science has told us about the world that we live in. So how does science shape society, aside from what we just talked about? Well, these are 5 examples of how science has shaped our society. Immunizations is a great example. The MMR, which is your measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. Normally this is given to young children. It's a series of 3 shots, an initial shot and 2 boosters that they get from birth until about 5. And the reason why you get it is it's herd immunity. So it protects the people who can't get an MMR shot and are susceptible to dying from measles, mumps, or rubella. Most people would probably survive an infection of measles, mumps, or rubella, given that they're old enough. Infants, pregnant women, and those that have compromised immune systems, whether it's cancer, anything like that, they're not going to have the same ability to recover. And so the healthy people get MMR to protect those that aren't healthy. And that's science shaping our society. Another example is the hole in the ozone layer. This was a hot topic back when I was in college, and scientists who were specifically looking at the destruction of the ozone layer determined that there was something in our household refrigerator products called CFCs, and they're fluorinated carbons that basically go up into the atmosphere when we have refrigeration products that basically you're getting rid of them and they're off-gassing, and it would go up there and break up the ozone in this reaction. And the thing was, the CFCs were not getting depleted as quickly as the ozone layer, and so and what the ozone layer does is protect us. It keeps us warm. It's like a blanket, but it also protects us from the sun, so it also keeps us cool. And a hole in the ozone layer means that the sun's radiation is coming directly through, and we don't have that blanket protecting us, and that's not a very good thing because we know the importance of our ozone layer. So there was a switch in products. They switched to brominated products instead of fluorinated products, and what ended up happening is the ozone layer is healing itself. It's becoming smaller, which is a great thing. It means that it's able to regenerate despite us potentially destructing it. And so buying products without CFCs, aerosol cans, and things like that became a thing in society. You had to make a conscious choice to buy the pump hairspray instead of the aerosol hairspray. But all of those individual personal choices as a society made overall the world a better place. And so that was a society issue. Endangered species. We know now the importance of species falling into low population numbers, that they have a very hard time regenerating. Tigers are protected, pandas are protected, koalas, certain breeds of like salamanders, the bald eagles. There's just a lot of protected endangered species because we know now that in our ecosystem it's not as simple to say producer, consumer, and predator and prey. It's very, very intricate, and removing one species from a population has a potential to really destroy an entire ecosystem and to move things out of balance or homeostasis. And so once populations of a species get down to a very low number, it will become rare or endangered, and then it's illegal to hunt them, to own them, anything like that, which just helps protect their populations. So science, specifically biology, environmental biology, shaped how we approach endangered species. The image here with all the color boxes, this is the UN's 17 sustainable goals. And so on here, there are 17 goals that the UN has come up with to develop what's called sustainable living. And it includes things that are huge, like no poverty, ending world hunger, gender equality, sustainable cities, life below water. And so it has 17 specific things that looking at if we don't protect this realm of our world now, what will happen in the future. So sustainable cities is a really big, and accommodations is a really big thing, because as we continue to build up on our world, whether it's vertical or out and consuming up the land, what we really are doing is taking over the land where we have animals and things like that living. And we know now that when we build these places and we construction zones, it shoves the deer, the rabbits, the birds, and everything out and crams everybody into a smaller space, which is not good for their populations. They get sick, they get disease, they run out of food, they die. And so obviously ending world hunger is a huge thing. At any given moment, there is enough food on the entire planet for everybody to have food and for no one to be hungry. But we have such an imbalance for a whole variety of reasons that there's too much food where there's not enough appetite, and there's not enough food where there's too much appetite. The last one on here is, we know, if you've ever heard the tobacco, obviously we know that smoking causes lung cancer. Tobacco causes it. So you'll find that there will be symbols on here saying that, according to the Surgeon General, that this product has been known to cause cancer. And so it has shaped the amount our society, because less people smoke. And that's a good thing. And now, of course, the new one is going to be vaping. That's the new thing that our society is going to have to address. So how do we approach false news then? So the world is full of false news, but it's going to be important to start encouraging your students to start thinking about what they know about science, and with the help of mom and dad maybe, to discern what's true and what's not true. Some of it will be based on their own personal life, some of it will be based on people they know. But for example, this says, no vaccines, stop vaccines, vaccines cause autism, or vaccines equal autism, and keep your vaccines. This is probably not new to anybody who's growing up in this generation, that there is a lot of speculation, or a lot of rumors, I would say, that vaccines have a direct correlation to autism. And there's really no scientific evidence to indicate that that is a strong link. There may be a coincidental link, but the thing is that as we learn more about autism, and we're making more diagnoses of autism, and we know that there's a spectrum now, it's really uncertain how much of what we know about autism and what we're linking to vaccines. Is it not just because we're more aware that autism is a disorder in itself, and that there's a wide spectrum and you can fall on the spectrum? And so now that we're diagnosing those more, it seems like it's correlated to vaccines, because those have also been up on the rise. But the thing is that they're on a biological cellular level. There's nothing that indicates that when you get this vaccine, this changes in your DNA, which then produces this autistic trait. So, but there's a strong group of people who really passionately believe that vaccines are bad for you. They have mercury in them. You will die if you get them. Horrible things could happen. And people do have adverse reactions to vaccines. That is true. That can happen. It is rare. It's considered rare. And the likelihood that you would get the disease and potentially die from what you're not being vaccinated against is also likely. So it's kind of interesting that science doesn't necessarily mean nothing bad will ever happen, but it just gives you, one, with MMR, you're the herd immunity. You're protecting yourself, but you're really protecting everybody else from the diseases they can't be protected from. But there's all kinds of examples of false news out there. And so really, the only way to know about what's true and what's false is to become a scientist, and to look at the sources that you're reading this information from, and deciding, is Facebook post that I'm reading about, this coronavirus treatment, is it reliable? Is it coming from coronavirusnews.com, or is it coming from the cdc.gov? Not that the CDC is always going to be right. We're going to talk about how sometimes science gets it wrong, but you have a better chance of cdc.gov being a vetted information source than coronavirusnews.com, written by, Joe Schmo living in Leavenworth, Kansas. So, you have to kind of start putting on those filters, and we're going to talk about what some of those tests that we can apply to help us determine what's true and what's not true. We talked about the scientific method already. We talked about pseudoscience. We talked about tests that can be applied to determine real science and pseudoscience. And sometimes those same tests can apply to determining fake news or false news. But it really comes down to putting on your detective gear and thinking like a scientist, and making sure you're really critical of the source you're getting the information from, and not so much being critical of the information you're reading, but being critical of where you're getting it from and making sure that it's a great source, it's a reliable source, and that it's not a biased media source. Even things like the news right now is very biased. You can flip it to one channel, it's going to say something, flip it to a different channel, something totally different. But primary sources, scientific sources, are all places to find real news and not fake scientific news. So this is going to end our impact of science. You should have just a few things to turn in for your notes, but make sure that you do that and you submit them back wherever you found this video link so that you will have completed the requirements for this particular part of our lecture.